you, Brandon.
that. You got it? Okay.
Yep, I got you. You're set.
Okay. You record. We'll be good to go. That way everybody that's attending can watch it later. If they need to, they can share it with their buddies. I'm sure Navionics will have that posted on their Facebook page or on their website. There we go. It's being recorded. So I can get rid of this little piece so you can see my full screen, and we'll be good to go. So here you can see on my screen, this is exactly what I'm looking at. So you guys are seeing my computer screen. And this right here is a pretty cool feature that Navionics has with their web app, where I can actually look at whatever I want. But we'll get into that in just a little bit. So what I'm going to explain to you guys is a theory that I call the percentage triangle. Now it's going to be a little bit confusing, and I'll do my best to explain it to you guys as we go through. But the biggest thing is the percentage triangle. It's a theory to find the biggest fish in a system using those contour lines and using seasonal movements. Now it's not always going to find all of the fish, but the key word there is we're trying to find the biggest fish in the system. And I actually got this from a buddy of mine from back home in the Northwest. His name's Seth Burrell, and he owned a TV show, a .com site, and his big thing on his show is that he always wanted to show the largest fish on a body of water. He always wanted to try to catch those biggest ones, and after time and time again, he figured out all of these different ways, or noticed all these places where continually over and over again all these big fish were coming from similar areas. And so he came up with this percentage triangle, and I adopted that from him and took it into tournaments and more of a recreational use. I had to make some slight adjustments so that I could really use it in tournament formats. But for me, over the course of my career, this has came into play time and time again all over the country. And the reason it works so well is because it applies to so many different body types of water. Now, I have been to places where you may go and there's just not a lot of depth changes. Right? There's lakes all across the country. Doesn't matter where you're at. Mostly natural lakes that just don't have a lot of depth change. You know, they may be real shallow lakes, and that can be really difficult to use. You know, they may still have contour lines, which can help, but a lot of times I'll go and I'll look at grass lines for that kind of thing, because that's going to act very similar as contour lines. A lot of times the grass will actually grow at certain depths, and it creates those walls, or it creates those contour lines for the fish to follow. The other reason this works so good in tournaments is it allows me to eliminate dead water before I ever see a place or a lake that I'm going to. And you know, we still fish lakes that I've never been to before, and I don't always have time to go pre-practice, so being able to eliminate dead water helps me a ton. The next big thing is we want to be able to locate the biggest fish, right? It doesn't matter if we're fishing a tournament. Obviously, if we're in a tournament, we're going to want to catch the biggest fish, but even if you're just going fishing for fun, you want to catch the biggest fish because you want to be able to brag to all your buddies that you caught a bigger one than they did. The next thing is easy to pattern. It's going to save me time. So when I'm on the water, if things change, I can adapt the pattern. I can make changes. Always easy to make quick adjustments on the water. And I'm a firm believer that finding the fish is more important than figuring out what they're going to eat. Usually the hardest part is trying to find those fish, especially on a new body of water. And most people overlook this, but this last bullet point, talking about the largest fish in a system preferring cooler water, right? Bass are a warm water species, but if you think about it, think about where all the biggest fish are usually caught throughout the year, right? Early in the spring, when water temps are a little bit cooler, they're up shallow, they're more aggressive, they're easier to catch. As the water temperatures warm up, as the year goes on, the biggest fish are usually caught in extremely heavy cover, under big, thick grass mats where the water is going to be cooler, or they're found out deep. They're close to deep water where the water temps are cooler, or in a river, with that current pushing cooler water down into a system. That's where your biggest fish are always found. So remember that, even though bass are warm water species, the largest ones prefer cooler water, and that makes a big difference in this. So these are just a few things that I use day in, day out when I'm trying to locate these triangles. The first thing being a good contour topo map of whatever lake or river you're fishing. There's a bunch of different brands out there, but just having a big map that way is sometimes easier to look at because you have a big, giant section. Right? You've got this big piece of paper that you can look at. The next thing is having a sonar unit with GPS, side imaging, down imaging. That's going to make everything that we do on the water a whole lot easier. It's going to make our lives easier on the water, quicker adjustments. The other thing is Google Earth and Bing Maps. I use this a lot on really shallow lakes, river systems with a lot of backwaters, things like that, where if the water's fairly clear, I can use that and actually be able to get a good idea of how that lays out. The other cool thing is that on Google Earth and Bing Maps, you can actually look at different dates, and sometimes the water levels in certain lakes will be 30 or 40 feet down. So then at that point, I'll actually pull up my Navionics mobile app. I'll pull it up on an iPad, and I can go back and look at Google Earth or Bing Maps on my computer, and then also look at that water level that's down 20 or 30 feet and get an exact lay of how that lays out in the lake. I can see bottom composition changes. I can see all of that all at the same time. So those are a couple things that I use all the time. So here's a perfect example. This is a picture of me when I've kind of first started prepping for this year's Classic, actually at Lake Hartwell. The iPad, that's Lake Hartwell. That's Navionics mobile app of Lake Hartwell. I'm able to pinch in, zoom. I can go through the whole entire lake. I've got Bing Maps pulled up on my computer, and I've got a notepad. So I always take notes as I'm going through these different areas that I want to check out, or different points of interest that I'm going to be able to use. So right here you can see there's kind of a zoomed in version, and you can look, if you look on the that Bing map, you can see how the water level's down. You can see all those islands, and I can't tell you how many times it's really come into play where I'll be looking at my Navionics app on my iPad, and I'll find an area that I think is very potential, and I'll look at it on Google Earth or Bing Maps, and a lot of times you'll find a real subtle rock pile or something on one of those contour lines on a break line that you may not have known was there, or you definitely wouldn't have known was there until you paddled over it with a Humminbird unit, and found it on side imaging or something. So being able to kind of take all of that technology and put it together, you can just eliminate so much water so quickly that it's, that's our biggest thing when you're so limited on time of what you can actually do. Now the biggest thing to look for is, if it's in a river system, I'm looking for what are called inside turns. Now this is what forms the triangle, usually from a spawning flat, right? That we have to have a spawning flat. Fish, their lives revolve around spawning, right? They do it every year, so we kind of use that time of year, a big spawning flat, as the base of our triangle. The reason for that is that this makes it a time of year that we can kind of dial in those fish, right? We know that in different parts of the country, fish spawn at different times of the year, but we can use that as a base of our triangle for timing-wise of how these fish are going to move throughout that triangle. Now, the larger the spawning flat you have, the better it's going to be, right? Because that is allowing more habitat for more fish. So the larger the spawning flat, the more fish are able to live there, and the better it's going to be. Now, the next biggest thing, contour lines. That's where the Navionics comes into play, is where we can look at contour lines. These are going to be the highways of the triangle. These are how fish move throughout the water system, just like we drive down the road on the highway. Right? The yellow and the white lines on the highway that we stay in between are contour lines for the fish. And so just to give anyone that's watching, if you don't know, the wider the gaps, the more gradual the slope's going to be, the flatter it's going to be. The closer those lines get together, the steeper the drop's going to be. And keep that in mind, because that's going to be very important as we go through the rest of this. And the next thing is points. Right? The outer points of these bays, that's going to form the tip of our triangle. So we're starting to form this triangle. Points with steeper drops on the sides are perfect places. Anytime it's near a creek channel or steep river channel drop, that's going to be a place where those fish can hold, and they can ambush any type of bait fish, whether it's shad, blueback herring, perch, doesn't matter where it's at. So this is obviously not a Navionics picture, but this is just a very simple drawing so that there's not a bunch of things going on, so that you can get kind of a general idea of how these fish are going to move throughout the triangle. So in the very back of a bay, it's flatter, the contour lines are further apart, and that's going to form the bases of our triangles. It's where these fish spawn. We know that they're moving back there. That's where they're going to do their duties, and then they're going to move out. So just to kind of give you guys an idea, the fish start at the tips, they move back toward the base of the triangle, and move back out. So I'm going to kind of go through with you guys, go through all of those different sections of the triangle, or more or less different times of year, and how these fish move throughout the triangle. And we'll get into a few different baits that I use throughout those different times of year, but we won't get too much into the baits, because remember, finding the fish is usually more important than catching them, or at least that's the harder part. Catching them when you find them is usually a little bit easier. So here's another example of a river, and right there where you see it says spawning flat, that's the inside turn, right? Where that river channel, the red line, that's going to be our river channel. It makes that inside turn where you've got this big giant spawning flat. That light green is all grass, and you can see where those lines come tight together, and that forms our percentage triangle. So here's another image that I actually just pulled off of the Navionics web app. This is a image from the Columbia River, and you can see the really cool thing here that I'm going to show you guys is these are both the exact same place, but when you look at the top one where we've got that big spawning flat, it's kind of that darker blue color. You can see where that's less than 5 foot of water, essentially. So that's where these fish are going to want to spawn, right? We've got a big river channel that comes out around the outside, and we've got that inside turn that forms the spawning flat. That's the base of our triangle, and as we move out toward the point of our triangle, you can see how tight those contour lines come together. Now, if you look, there's a difference between the top and the bottom image. And if you look over in the bottom left corner of each image, there's this kind of little upside down Wi-Fi signal looking thing. And what that is that actually changes the HD of the contour lines. So you look at the top image, it's a little bit more simple contour lines, still has very good contour lines, but then when you look at the bottom one, it's much more detailed, right? It's 1 foot contours. So the reason that I use both of these is that when I'm first trying to identify where those inside turns and where the river channels run, it's easier for me to see when I've got the 5 foot contour lines exactly where that river channel runs. And then once I I identify that, I'll actually change it, go to the 1 foot contours, and that allows me to really dial it in and really see how everything lays out underneath the water. So remember that's a big thing. That's right off the web app on Navionics.com. So here's the next thing is when I try to figure out a triangle within a triangle. And what this is going to do is this is going to kind of be similar to a spot within a spot. It's kind of that same type of theory. But once you've located your big triangle, these a lot of times are going to be places where the fish are going to stage up pre-spawn, and then they'll also be the same places that when these fish finish spawning that they're going to move out to and be post-spawn later. So if you can find these places, make sure you're marking waypoints, because you can come back to them and catch them pre-spawn and post-spawn a lot of times. This is where these fish are going to ambush, and most of the time this is formed by little secondary points that are within our major triangle. And I think the best way for you guys to get an understanding of this is for me to show you a picture. So right here, this is another screenshot off of the web app, and you can see where I've got the big triangle drawn, right? We've got this spawning flat, and there'd be more triangles throughout here because each one of these bays would have a triangle in it, right? This is a really good section. I give kudos to anyone that can figure out exactly where this is, but it's a very well-known place that harbors a lot of fish. So this big triangle, right, that's our percentage triangle. We've got a spawning flat in the back. These fish can spawn, and if you look within that, there's these little secondary underwater points. You wouldn't know that they were there if you didn't have Navionics to look at, right? You just look at the bank and you wouldn't know that those little secondary points came out. But when you look on here, those set up perfectly for the fish to be able to move up and down within that section of the triangle, right? So when these fish are wintering, or sometimes in their summer holding patterns, they're usually out towards the tip of this triangle. And
hey Brandon,
as
Jason,
the water, you can see how the contour lines. Yeah.
Hey, Jason Demarath called your spot.
What was that?
That's exactly where it is.
Where do you call it?
Sturgeon Bay.
Bingo. I'm going to have to figure out something to give him for that. I don't know. We'll figure out something. I'm impressed that he got that. Good work. Because I even made sure when I took a screenshot of this that it wouldn't say Sturgeon Bay anywhere. But I'm impressed. So he can probably tell you that there's fish that just live around here. But it's because of the way that it sets up. Actually, now that it's out there, yeah, it's Sturgeon Bay. And this is one of the places that I finished second in the Bassmaster Elite tournament there a few years ago. It's actually just off this screen, but these fish literally in 4 days moved from the back of the triangle, right? The first day some of the guys had caught spawning fish. They were back in the backs on these shallow flats where you can see the darker blue. And what had happened is Mother Nature didn't really change anything, but there was so much fishing pressure on these fish that they continually moved further and further out of this triangle, right? Naturally, they were getting ready to be done spawning, and they were going to move out anyways, but I think the amount of fishing pressure that was put on these fish moved those fish out further and further, and by the 4th day, I was actually catching fish all the way out on the tip of this triangle, where you see out here kind of towards where it says Snake Island, and these contour lines get really steep. By the 4th day, these fish had moved all the way out there, and I was patterning these fish as they were doing that with these percentage triangles, and there was no fish there during practice. I checked it. I had marked a few waypoints where I found some little rock piles out towards those steep drops, but it was like a dead sea out there, and by the 4th day, those fish were out there. And so I was able to, once I figured that out, I was able to run and just fish the tips of all these triangles and able to catch fish. And I really thought that I was going to have a shot to win, but old JBD did his job and caught a giant sack there.
Hey, Brandon.
Yes.
One of the questions came up when you're illustrating some of the triangles on the map, if you can use a mouse pointer, if at all possible, it will show.
Here's the thing. I have my mouse pointer when I pull it up here. Let me see if I can figure out a way to do it. I can make this bigger. Here, I'll just make this bigger for you guys so you can see it. All right, let me move it right here. Okay, there's my little mouse pointer. We'll use it this way. So I was trying to use it when it was full screen and it wouldn't let me. And I'm over here doing all kinds of hand movements that you guys can't see me actually moving my hands. So when I zoom this out, it kind of messes up my my triangles here. So the base of your triangle back here, you've got these where it's darker blue. That is where these fish are going to want to spawn, generally. Not all fish will spawn there. I mean, some fish will spawn out here, some will spawn out here. I'm talking majority of the biggest fish in the system are going to want to spawn out here. Now, if you look, it's a little bit difficult to tell because this picture is zoomed in, but this is actually a creek channel that runs all the way out, and it dumps in. I'll just go ahead and move it. It dumps in right here. You can see there's kind of this little channel that runs in here, and that creates this triangle, right? So we've got this darker blue section. That's the base of our triangle. We've got a couple small secondary points that are creating secondary triangles here. And during the winter time, these fish want to live out here, right? They want to be closer to the tips of these triangles. Now, the reason for that is out towards the tips of the triangles in the early spring, winter time, conditions change a lot. So, whether it could be extremely warm, 70 degrees one day, and then it could be snowing the next day in certain parts of the country. So when those contour lines are real close together, that allows these fish to be able to move up and down in the water column without having to swim very far away. All right, so a fish, I'll just go back to this real quick. A fish isn't going to want to be all the way up here. Maybe in the afternoon the water warms up. He's not going to be all the way up here shallow on this. He's going to maybe be shallow out here, but he knows that it's going to cool down and he wants to be able to go to the deeper water where he feels a little bit safer in the wintertime before he's ready to spawn. Now, as the water temperatures warm up, those fish begin to move back into this triangle, right? The water's kind of stabilizing. We're getting warmer nights. The days are getting longer. And these fish continue to move back, right? They may move up and down this way, but I'll find them in a small little section of the triangle, and that's where those fish are going to be. And once I figure that out, I'm able to pattern that along the rest of the lake. So early winter, early spring, out towards the tips of the triangles. Once I figure that out, I'm able to look at my map. I'll pull it up on my Humminbird unit. I'll go full map, or if I have my iPad and I've got internet access, I can do it on my iPad. I can do it on my iPhone if I need to. But just anytime you have a bigger screen, it's going to make it easier. So a lot of times I prefer to do it on an Onyx 10 unit or on an iPad. Just because I've got a bigger screen. And once you identify that, you can draw more triangles, look at the map and say, okay, here's a very similar triangle, and I don't need to mess around fishing the rest of that pocket. And so as the water warms up, I'll continue to move back. So early winter, this played a huge role at the Classic for a lot of guys, but was the new Shadow Rat Deep by Rapala. The reason a jerkbait works so well is because these fish are still lethargic. It's cold. But I'm not going to get too much into all the different techniques because I only have so much time to talk to you guys, and I want to get the point of the triangle across more so than specific baits. So a couple more big key baits this time of year: the Shad Rap and the Shad Rap RS. The RS sometimes works better for me. Actually, it doesn't get as much promotion as the regular Shad Rap, but the RS version actually is going to suspend. So a lot of times when the fish aren't as aggressive, that's going to help you out because you're able to pause it and just keep it in their face, almost like a jerkbait. Another one is a half-ounce Terminator football jig. A lot of fish this time of year are keying in on crawfish, and so anything that you can fish that imitates a crawfish perfectly, you can fish it really slow. That's going to be a huge key for me. Now, early spring, pre-spawn, water temps are getting, let's say, upper 40s to mid 50s. Now they're going to be usually from the tip of that triangle toward halfway back. We'll say somewhere in that area. Now I'm going to be looking for these staging areas. Depending on the body of water, it may be on the bank, it may be deep. Right? Here's a perfect example of pre-spawn. Bull Shoals 2012 Elite Series Tournament. The fish wanted to be shallow. They were ready. The water was warming up. The only problem is that the water had dropped 7 feet in 2 weeks. Dropped 7 feet. I was watching the water levels. So what that told me is that these fish, the big females, didn't want to be on the bank. They weren't comfortable being up there because they'd sit next to a bush and 2 days later they'd be high and dry. And so I identified the sections of the lake where I thought the biggest fish lived. I drew out these triangles and said, okay, this is where these fish want to spawn. And when they're not ready, when they're ready to spawn, that's where they're going to be. But where are they at before that? And so I drew these triangles out and I said, okay, here's the deeper cover where they're going to be. And all I had to do is I'd idle around. I'd find little offshore rock piles. Right, most of the water up there was more, I guess, a little bit more muddy. There wasn't a lot of rock on the bottom, so when I found a hard spot or found a roadbed, the fish were piled up there, and they were all the bigger ones. So it can be a little bit tricky, right? Different places, if the water is rising, they may be on the bank, but they're not going to be all the way to the back of the triangle. That's what I'm trying to stress here, is that they're still in that section of the triangle, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be deep or shallow. That all depends on the day-to-day conditions or what's going on in the present time. And so they're still not all the way toward the back of the triangle. So anytime I'm fishing shallow, one of the things I'm going to reach for, Berkeley Havoc Pit Boss, awesome bait, just for flipping around any type of cover, grass, wood, you name it. Smaller compact bait, but it has a lot of action, so if it's in dirtier water situations, you can pull out a black and blue one, and those fish are going to be able to feel it before they even see it. The next thing is the Rapala DT series. The reason I like this is because I can grab one out, I can look at the bill, it says DT4, it's going to dive to 4 foot. If it says DT20, it's going to dive to 20 foot, and so on and so forth. So it makes it really easy if I'm trying to fish a specific depth when I figure out where those fish are. Grass lakes, go on lipless crankbaits. That's going to be a huge key. It allows me to cover a lot of water, right? So if I'm trying to find these fish, I've only got so many days to practice, I need to cover a lot of water. So in practice, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fish baits that allow me to cover a lot of water. And I'll also throw, a lot of the Storm, Arashi stuff, a lot of the newer stuff. Not as many fish have seen it, and they just flat out catch fish. So the spawn, this is where the triangle comes into play the least. The reason for that is that it's pretty easy to find fish that are spawning. Right? We put the trolling motor down, I'm still going to look for those. I'm still going to use my Navionics maps to be able to find where those big flats are. But once I do that and I know that the fish are spawning, I'm going to get up there. I'm going to throw a big buzzbait around and try to find those bigger females. Because the good thing about a buzzbait that time of year, you're able to cover a lot of water, and it seems like the females, if there's two fish sitting on a bed, usually the female's going to eat the buzzbait before the male. Not always, but usually they're suckers for big buzzbaits, especially in the morning. Now, the spawn, usually the fish are outside of the triangle. They're back towards those big flats. Another thing that I love throwing, big swim baits. A little secret here that I usually don't tell people, but I'll go ahead and let you guys know. It's the wild eye bluegill. Small profile, big female bass. They absolutely hate bluegill. If anyone has fished during the spawn, you have been sitting there aggravated by all the bluegill swimming around, because you'll have a big giant female. She'll be all worked up on a bed and you're fishing for her, and then here comes this little bluegill and she forgets that you're even there and she starts chasing bluegill around. And you just lost everything you started working for. So I just combat that and throw a bluegill swim bait a lot of times, and it works. Late spring, post-spawn. Remember earlier I said these fish a lot of times will use the same places that they use during the pre-spawn. A lot of the same little rock piles or secondary points, because the contour lines, they're not changing, right? Their highways aren't changing. It's just like when you're driving to work. Most often times you drive to work the same way every single day. The only reason you might not drive the same way is if you get a little snowstorm, there's a wreck, somebody crashed on your north. Generally, you're going to use the same contour lines to travel back and forth from where they spawn to where they winter or their summer patterns, and unless something crazy changes, right, then they may decipher off their general path. But this is usually, for me, when this triangle becomes the most effective, because most guys, early in the spring when the fish are moving up, it seems like it's easier to catch them, right? It's easier to find them. We know which direction they're going. But after the spawn, start getting into that late spring mode, and these fish, they tend to spread out more, I guess, right? Some fish are still spawning maybe. Some fish are already moving out deep. They spawned a month ago, and we've got fish that are just kind of cruising around the banks not knowing what to do. So this is usually going to be back toward the middle of our triangle, right? Similar to the same section as our pre-spawn mode. The big females, they get done with the beds, and they're moving back. They're moving back out towards deeper water, or back out to where they feel more comfortable, right? Back out to cooler water. And so you're going to have these fish that are spread out, but one thing that I'm going to look for is places where these females can stage up on their way out using the triangle, right? So that can be ditches that lead out from these big flats. Here, let me just go back, and I'll just pull this one back up here. So right, they get done spawning. Say there's some fish spawning right back in this pocket. We got this mainland point that comes out here. It's blocking everything from the wind. The fish spawn out across here. And right here, we've got this kind of this little bowl that goes between these 2 points, right? And you can see you got this darker line, and that's telling me that there's a real steep drop there. And one thing that these big females love to do is go sit on a steep drop like that. They may not be deep. They may sit 7 or 8 feet deep right here, but the bait fish is going to come over this point, right? The wind comes in here, blows current around, the bait fish get pushed around here, and these fish are able to sit right here, and it's not very far for them to swim out here. Right? They don't want to swim out here unless something is causing them to swim out there immediately. So they're going to just sit right here, and this is going to be their first access to deep water. So they're going to be right here, still toward the back of the triangle, but on that first deep water access point. Go ahead and get back to our slide. So big old 10-inch power worm. If I'm fishing for smallmouth, obviously probably not going to throw this a lot, but largemouth lakes, any of the Tennessee River stuff, you know, those big females, the bass, they're getting schooled up, they're starting to get out on those ledges, they're using those little secondary ditches to run out there. This is going to be a big player for me. Next thing is if I'm fishing a small profile, slides through the grass really easy. Old Ish's fat frog, another key player for me. And a little Arashi weight crank. If I've got places that have real sparse grass, that weight crank allows me to cover a lot of water, but that action, that wake bait action, will draw fish from a really long distance because it just looks like a bait fish that's minding its own business. You know, I've seen it a bunch of times in where you see real bait fish just skimming under the surface, making that kind of that V. Now summer, usually these fish are going to start to move back out toward the tip of the triangle, right? Unless it's a lake that's just got a lot of bass, then the fish are probably going to live underneath underneath that grass, right? But most places, the fish, they school up, they're moving out toward the tip of the triangle, and they become more bait fish oriented. So I take advantage of that, right? Things are warming up, their temperature is warming up, and I want to, you know, take every advantage of these fish that I can, really. And so I'm going to throw a lot of crankbaits, just depending on the depth. I'm going to figure out whichever crankbait I need for it. Flutter spoons are an awesome way to fire up fish. A lot of times they'll get schooled up out there, and it may not be their feeding time, but you can still fire them up with something like a big crankbait or a big flutter spoon. Next thing is, if I'm smallmouth fishing, I'm going to put on a Havoc money maker. I'm going to put it on a drop shot, depending on how deep I'm fishing. I'm going to go anywhere from an 1/8 ounce. It's a little Eco Pro Tungsten full contact drop shot weight. And it's going to be 3/6 or an 1/8 ounce, you know, all the way up to a 1/2 ounce sometimes. The reason this works, I can fish it at any depth. I'm able to keep it in the strike zone, so if the fish are sluggish a little bit, I'm able to keep it in the strike zone longer, and it just works good on pretty much any species of bass that is out there to live. Now, this is kind of a tricky part, and this took me a little while to understand or get a grasp on how these fish moved during this time of year, and that's in the fall and the early winter. And what I figured out is that the easiest way to break it down is they're going to be located within the triangle, different sections depending on the main forage, right? So shad lakes, most things that you read, you know, most places in the country that have shad, the shad, as it cools down, are going to start to move back towards the backs of the pockets, right? They're moving back toward the back of the triangle. So the bass are keyed in on that, right? They've grown their whole lives. They know the bait fish are going back there when it cools down. So I'm actually going to move back toward the back of the triangle. I'm going to follow those shad back towards the backs, and when I figure out, still, I can use that and figure out what part of the triangle those shad are in at that time of the year, and I can go run all the other pockets and just fish that section of the triangle, right? I don't mess with the tip of the triangle or the back of the triangle. I'm going to fish that section of it, and that's going to allow me to break down the water that much quicker. Now, what you got to think is lakes that don't really have shad. I grew up on a bunch of lakes that don't have shad, and every time I read something in a magazine, I had no idea what they were talking about because our bait fish, they just don't go shallow. Right? If you're a lot of perch, blueback, kokanee lakes, things like that, a lot of times they're out and they're going deeper. So the fish are going to actually move more toward the tip. Right? They're going to move back towards or out towards the tips of these triangles on non-shad lakes. The only exception that I've seen to that is kokanee or, you know, landlocked salmon, where the bass are eating those. They will actually go shallower and eat those because the kokanee are spawning up the rivers. And so remember that. If you have that, there's not very many places in the country, but if you have that, take advantage of it. I'm not even going to go through a lot of this just because we're getting short on time. I want to hear what questions you guys have. I'm sure you guys have all kinds of questions. 40 minutes isn't very long for me to be able to go through and give you guys everything that I know on how to find fish, but that's a pretty quick little introduction to it, I guess.
We got a bunch, Brandon. I'll try to. We're probably not going to get to everybody's, but I'll try to key on the ones that came up a lot.
Tell them to send them to my Facebook page, and then get on my Facebook page, and I'll answer all the questions they got.
There you go. So if we don't get to your question, I've got them written down. I'll send them to Brandon, and we can post them on Facebook. The ones we've got, we'll see how far we get. Walter asked about, is there a copy to view online? Yes, Walter. We'll have it posted on Bass Pro as well as Navionics website, so just look for that hopefully Friday, if not Monday. Kevin, well, you can answer this one on your Facebook, Brandon. Kevin wanted to know why you were such a beast, but we'll...
Oh, I don't know exactly what he's referring to, but yeah, tell him to hit me up on Facebook and we can define that a little better.
All right, Tony wanted to know, would you still fish an area or structure even if you don't mark any on the graph?
If it's shallow cover, yeah, because I may not be able to see the fish up shallow unless I have Humminbird 360 or something where I can see shallow out in front of me. If it's deeper water, usually if I don't see some type of bait fish or some sort of sign of life, I'm going to move on, right? Because I'm going to try to find the fish that are the most active, and I'm going to continue to try to find that.
Okay, Andy asked the name of the app you were using, and that is, it's on the iTunes or Google Play, and that is the Navionics USA boating app.
Yep.
John asked about the 1-foot contour level, and that is actually called the sonar charts, or on your plotter, you can look it up as fish and chip. And we have a John Gunn. Nope, John.
Can you still see my screen?
Yep, still see it.
Okay, here, I can show you right here. Here's Sturgeon Bay. Oh, I zoomed in too far. So I've actually got it clicked. Now you'll see the difference, right? Click this little button, kind of like an upside down looking Wi-Fi sign. See the difference in how it changes? So this is actually allows me to quickly, just with a click of a button, be able to go back, and some places it's easier to identify different places on one or the other, so it's easy to go back and forth.
Okay. Nathan Adams asked, how do you determine a good spawning flat from a great one when you're looking at a map?
Usually the bigger spawning flats are going to be better. So I'm going to concentrate. We go down here. This is a giant spawning flat, right? They've got a ton of area to spawn down through here, but they've still got close access to deep water out here where they can live when they don't want to be spawning. So usually if I'm going to look for a giant spawning flat, it needs to have some sort of cover on it. I'm looking for gravel or rock for smallmouth. I'm looking for some type of vegetation that the largemouth can get around, or some type of cover. And that's going to make a great spawning flat, is when you have that additional cover up there.
Okay, Tyne King asked, do you fish, after fish spawn in the backs of the creeks, do you feel they stay in the channel or do they move out to the main lake?
They will work their way out to the main lake a lot of times, or at least the majority of the fish. If it's a giant creek, they may not ever leave that creek. Right? The fish may not go all the way to the main lake if it's a massive creek. But more times than not, they're actually going to go toward the main lake. If there's a big creek that has plentiful deep water and the bait fish never leave, then those bass don't ever have to actually leave.
Okay, Phil Kinnenberg, and I apologize if I butcher anybody's name here. Phil Kinnenberg, does current matter when setting up on river flats? Is it better on an upside or a downside of the current?
Can you say that again? On the flat?
On a flat on a river, does the current matter when you're setting up on that flat on a river? Do you find it better in the upside current or the downside current of a flat?
Generally, I'm going to look towards the downside for when the fish are getting ready to spawn. If they will actually set up towards the front in certain situations, but mostly I'm going to look toward the downside because that's going to form that triangle a little bit better. And when they want to be in the current is when they want to be towards that tip of the triangle. And that's where your channel swing is going to come back into the tip of that triangle, so you'll gain that river current back.
I'm going to butcher this one. Brian Warshowski wants to know, do you use your triangle application in tidal rivers, or does it change at all?
I think it still applies because the fish still need the same things, right? They still need an area to spawn, and I think it may actually come into play even more so in a tidal situation due to the fact that your water is always fluctuating, right? So it's going to allow me to identify places where those fish can move up and down, right? I'm going to be able to look at my Navionics map and see where those contour lines come close together right outside of a flat, because those fish, when the tide comes up, they may want to be able to move up on that flat, get a bite to eat and feed up, and then when that current starts to drop, they're going to have to go somewhere, right? Delaware River, it fluctuates 6, 7 feet. They have to be able to move somewhere else. They're going to be up there in the mud. So being able to identify on a map where those fish are going is going to help a lot.
Will Francis wants to know, is there an average size of your triangle?
No, there's definitely not an average size because every lake sets up differently. Each pocket, each bay is going to be a little bit different size, so I just draw it generally on the size of the pocket that I'm looking at, or the cove.
And with that, I guess Justin McNeil wants to know, is there, where do you, let me understand this one again here, how do you determine where your corners are on the triangle, or how large that corner is?
The corners aren't as important. Right? I mean, if you look on a picture, these corners don't necessarily matter exactly where they are. Right? Fish may spawn up here outside of the triangle. The triangle just gives me an idea. You know, I'm not saying when I draw this triangle that they're only going to live within inside of those black lines. Right? This just gives me an idea of saying, okay, it's big, it's flat back here like a base of a triangle, and it skinnies down. The contour lines on my Navionics chart get narrow just like a triangle does out here. That's why the triangle works so well, just as a representation, but the corners don't actually matter.
Nate Wilson wants to know a flutter spoon size. Is there a particular size you recommend?
Generally 5 to 6 inch flutter spoons. They make all different sizes now, but 5 to 6 inch is going to be general. Just match it to whatever the main bait fish is. If it's smaller bait fish, go with a smaller flutter spoon. If they're feeding on big giant gizzard shad, go with a big 8-inch Magnum spoon.
Okay. Eric Hills asked your favorite color of the Arashi cranks.
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. Clear water, probably just my two favorite are going to be the black silver shad and wakasagi. In dirtier water, I like to throw the parrot color and actually the gold silver shiner, or the green gold shiner.
And looks like Dwayne Johnson asked about, he hears a lot of talk about drains from the elite pros. Is there any point of drains in your triangle at all?
Drains are going to form those secondary triangles, those little places where they can live. A place like that is Lake Hartwell. For the Classic, drains played a huge role into a lot of the top guys. And those fish, you still have to identify where those fish are going to spawn. Just what happens is those drains run into the spawning flats, and they usually have steep contour lines on the sides. And so during the wintertime, on those blueback herring lakes, those blueback are able to use those drains as highways. They're still using contour lines, and they swim up and down those. They'll go up shallow at night, and as the sun comes out, they start to move back out deep. So they're still using triangles and the contour lines. They just use them a little bit differently.
And Todd Payne, the base of the triangle, does that still depend on bottom composition?
Definitely you have to have the right bottom composition to inhabit those fish. Right? I mean, if you're on a lake that's full of smallmouth, I'm probably not going to go looking for smallmouth spawning in a big mud flat. They're going to want some type of gravel. So yes, very good question. Bottom composition does matter, definitely when the fish are trying to spawn. Just remember that even if it's a muddy bottom and you wouldn't think largemouth can spawn there, they can still spawn on lily pad root systems, on the bases of docks and pilings, and I mean they'll figure out a way to spawn if they have to.
I've got 3 in a row on the same between Jim, Johan, and Blastin Bassin, which is, well, actually Blastin is different. But can you quickly go over again how you draw the triangle when you look at a particular area?
Yeah, I sure can. Let's see if I can do it quick. I'll just take this one right here. So when I look at an area, oh wait, hold on. There we go. I can screenshot this. Here, do a little screenshot deal. Let me just open it up. We'll grab our screenshot from right here, and I'll drop it right into my PowerPoint, if I can actually pull it up. This will be the easiest way to do it for you guys. Okay, so I've got it right here, and let me actually change this so you can see it better. Okay, so we've got our big map. Take a triangle. Get this out here. Oops. So when I go to do this, I'm going to look back here, and I've got this spawning flat, right? They can't spawn out here. It's too deep. It's too steep for them. So I'm actually going to take, oops, wrong little button. This is going to be the base of the triangle. Back here on the darker blue, the spawning flat, the tip of the triangle is where the contours get real steep. You can see how it makes this dark black line. That's because the contour lines are so steep together, it's almost a vertical drop. And that's where the tip of the triangle is going to be. Back here towards the spawning flats, back towards the backs of the base. This is going to be the base of my triangle. Hopefully that worked out.
Let's see what else we got here. The Tennessee River, Andy asked, the Tennessee River has many triangles. How do you break down the productive ones and those that are not?
Usually by fishing them. I mean, that's, it's really hard. I mean, the thing you'll notice is that when you do it enough, you'll draw a triangle out on the Tennessee River, and when you do that, they won't all be created equal. So what happens is you actually find certain ones that are, I guess, kind of built similar. So here we go, Gunnersville. These fish I know want to spawn back here. Navionics chart shows that this is all shallow, right? It's dark blue shallow. It's actually even easier to do it on this one. So look out here, we've got steeper contour lines out here where it comes closer together. So these fish, I'm going to identify it here. It's going to be the base, back to here. And when you're looking at the Tennessee River, the thing to remember is, right, so this is North Saudi on Gunnersville. This is one ginormous spawning flat back here where my little arrow is. All these fish, or the majority of the fish, aren't spawning out on the main river, or at least the first ones. They're spawning back here. The water's going to warm up quicker, and so they funnel through these bridges. And so really you actually have like this giant triangle on the Tennessee River, places like this. Now what I'll do is I'll actually identify triangles within that are going to allow me to find these fish, right? I've got a little pocket here where these fish, when they're transitioning back to these spawning flats, they're going to hang out over here. When they're ready to spawn, they're going to move up in this pocket, they're going to spawn, but until they're ready, they want to be closer towards this deep water access.
Okay, I think we're about at our time, Brandon. We have got a slew of questions, so I will get with you after and probably send you an email on this, and then we can post them on your Facebook page. We've probably got another 30 questions here. So,
yeah, I'll try to make sure to get them all answered.
All right. Well, Brandon, I appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody that's joined us for the webinar. We look to try to do more of these with Bass Pro and have some different topics to help everybody a little bit more. Brandon, thank you again for helping us all out.
You're welcome. See you guys. There, I got a webcam. Later.